Good morning, everybody. How are you all doing today? Well, congratulations, you found your way here extra early this morning on Spring Forward. So we're continuing through our book of Genesis study. Let's start at the very beginning. And, the word Genesis simply means beginning. And there's a series of different beginnings that God does with his people. Over the last couple weeks here, we've heard stories of creation, where God began everything and formed the earth and the world and the universe. Then we read about the new beginning that God made when he flooded the earth to make a whole new start, but saved Noah and his family and the animals in the ark. And then we also heard last week about the city of Babel that was trying to build this great tower to the heavens, but God confused their languages and scattered them. And so that was a different beginning as well, and just another illustration of how sin and violence and pain was spreading and spreading and spreading throughout the world. So today we're going to hear a different story of a new beginning, and it's probably the most important story in the whole book of Genesis. The story of God starting over with a family. So hopefully you all got a copy of the little sheet over here that we're going to be walking through today. What I want you to do to get started this morning, since we're going to be talking about families, is to kind of huddle up with like 3-4 people around you and talk about the first few questions there. Who of your relatives lived the longest? What do you know about them? And are you the firstborn or later born of your parents? And what difference do you think your birth order maybe made in how you were raised? Talk briefly. I know that you have long stories about this, but talk briefly about that with a few people around you.
I was the second born. So one of the longest family members was. I never had no wheels. I had always a hand-me-down.
Oh, yeah. My mom, she did more or less. She was the I was raised for 7 years. Yeah, I was in my 20s. She was always, my grandfather got a car close. So they do, at least I know she's really always.
All right, I'll have you finish up your conversations, and grab your Bibles if you have them, or on your phone if you've got that, or we've got some extra Bibles out and around, either up there or on the back table there. We're going to look at the end of chapter 11 of Genesis, so up in the front. And so the end of chapter 11 talks about the generations of Terah. He had sons Abraham, Nahor, and Haran had Lot. So Lot was Abram's nephew, and they talks about their wives and children, but Sarai, Abram's wife, was barren; she had no child, and Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. And they went forth together from Ur of the Chaldeans, which is essentially where modern-day Iraq is, so off to the east, and to go into the land of Canaan. But when they came to Haran, which is like modern-day Syria, they settled there. The days of Terah were 205 years, and then Terah died in Haran. So he had this plan to go and live in Canaan, but got about halfway there and, for whatever reason, dropped anchor there and then died. So why do you think that they might have settled there in Haran rather than continuing all the way to Canaan where he was planning to go?
Fertile soil there.
Yeah.
They had their flocks.
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, they were definitely nomadic shepherds. The whole family of Abraham, Abram, where he's known as right in this part of the story. So maybe they had found a good spot there in Haran and said, here's good. Why keep going?
Did God tell him to go to Canaan, or was it Abraham that was supposed to go to Canaan?
Well, so Terah already had plans to go there. And then in chapter 12, then we hear the Lord said to Abram, go from your country there in Haran and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And he actually doesn't even say where it is. But we know where he ends up going was Canaan. And the crazy thing is, Abram said, okay, and packed up everything and left and went. So there's a little bit more to this story in Acts chapter 7. This is when Stephen, the one who ended up being stoned to death for being a follower of Jesus, he was the first martyr. He had this long speech where he was defending himself, where he was, kind of recounting the whole history of their people before he ended up saying some pretty inflammatory words that got him stoned. And so, it says, he said, brothers and fathers, hear me. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he lived in Haran, and said to him, go out from your land and from your kindred, and go into the land that I will show you. So he went out from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed him from there into this land, Israel, in which we were now living. Yet he gave him no inheritance in it, not even a foot's length, but promised to give him as a possession to his offspring after him, though he had no child. So he had given him all this instruction about, that was where he was going to settle them. That was going to be their promised land. So somebody want to read those first 3 verses of chapter 12 of Genesis?
Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse. And by you all the families of the earth shall bless themselves.
So what command and promises did God give Abram? What did he tell him to do? Go. Go where?
Land he will give.
Yeah, I'll show you. Just go. Yep. Yep. And what were the promises? The 3 promises that God gave.
Great nation.
Yeah, you'll become a great nation. And why was that kind of surprising to Abram? They're getting old. He's like 75, something like this. Yeah, Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. His wife, they'd never had any kids. And God said, I'm going to make you into a great nation. What was the second blessing that he was going to give them?
Make you famous.
Make you famous, yeah. Yeah. So that's the third one. I'll make you to be a blessing. Yeah, I'll make of you a great nation. I will bless you. I'll make your name great so that you will be a blessing. And later, he says again, I will give you this land I'll give you a land of your own. So the 3 promises: you will have many descendants. I will give you a land of your own, and I will make your name great so that you will be a blessing to all the families of the earth. So how does the fact that Abram and Sarai were 75 and 65 when they left for Canaan make you feel?
You gotta be kidding me. I gotta walk where?
Right. Yeah, God told them the up stakes, in that age. Right.
There
Pick
were
up
a few
everything
people when they
and
came
go.
over here from the old country that were in their late 70s, or even there was one that was in his early 80s.
Yeah. Yep. So some of your own ancestors came to this nation, not when they were young and spry,
Yeah,
but
my
even when they were
great-
older.
Great grandfather that came over, only 24.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Usually hear about it's the young ones that go off and settle somewhere new, but sometimes God calls you when you're older to start something new. As you grow older, what would you like to accomplish for God? Yeah, whatever He wants, whatever He puts in front of you to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the promises that God gave to Abram was, "You will be a blessing to others." How can you be a blessing to others? What are some ways that you've seen God using you to bless other people?
Help them, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Help.
Giving people help when they need it. Yeah. Whether that's financial
Visit
help
them.
or
Take some food.
visiting them, bringing
Your
food.
gift of giving.
Yeah.
Because everybody has different gifts.
Exactly. Paul spends a whole chapter in 1 Corinthians talking about all the spiritual gifts that God gives to us and how they're all not for us, but to bless others. That's 1 Corinthians 12, right before the love chapter, where he says, and then I'll show you in a still more excellent way the gift of love. That's what we're all called to do, is to share God's love and to use whatever gifts, whatever blessings that we've received, not to hold on to them and hoard them for ourselves, but they're an opportunity to bless the people around us. How many times have you moved as an adult? How many? So after you first left your family home, if you ever did, have you moved once? Raise your hand if you've moved once. Keep your hand up if you've moved twice, 3 times, 4 times. I think that's about where I am. Since I've been away from college. Yeah, away from seminary. 1, 2, 3, 4 now, different communities. 5, 6, 7, 8, wow, 9, 10, 11.
At least I was counted 11.
Wow,
Times in 1 year.
11? How many times do you think?
At least 12.
At least 12. Oh my goodness. That's awesome. So sometimes, you know, and what were the reasons that made you move over the years?
Different jobs.
Jobs? Yep. What else?
Going to
A new
college.
adventure?
Going to college.
Yep. Schooling? Mm-hmm.
When you get married and leave home.
Yep. Sometimes getting married takes you to a new community or a new church or
College, when kids go off to college.
yeah. Yep. Yeah, some folks follow their kids where they go. They want to be close to their grandkids. Yep. You know, sometimes we go through sometimes the reason for a move is because of a stressful situation, you know, where you have to leave a relationship or you have to leave a community because things have just gotten toxic.
Jobs too.
Yeah, yeah. So in the midst of all the changes that you've gone through, all the moves, all the transitions, how has your faith been an anchor for you during those times?
The only thing that kept me going.
Yeah.
It's consistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the midst of all of the changes, our faith in God, you know, God is our
The one and
anchor.
only consistent thing.
Yep. Yep.
No matter what happens, he's seen us through.
Mm-hmm.
I was just gonna say, yeah, too, you realize what your faith is actually, what it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's sickness or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And it really hits you in the head, like, oh, I'm not alone in this here.
Yeah. Martin Luther, you know, wrote a mighty fortress based on Psalm 46, which says, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in times of trouble. So no matter what we're going through, God is there with us. So let's read a little bit further in Genesis 2 here, or Genesis 12. Somebody read verses 4 through 9.
So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Through 9?
Yeah.
Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, read one more verse.
Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe.
So when Abram came to this promised land, and God said, I'm going to give you this land that you're on. It's occupied by all these other people. But he said, I'm going to give this land to you and your descendants. And he gets there, and suddenly he finds that there's a famine going on there. None of the crops are producing. Everybody's starving. How would he might have felt about God's promise in that moment?
Did I make a wrong turn?
Yeah, did I make a wrong? Are you sure this is the right place? Wait a minute. How is this going to work? So what did he do? Yeah, had to go to Egypt. Isn't that interesting? that he was a soldier. The story of the Bible, you can think of it in different movements. That God, say this. Let's see. I wish I had a map right here, but we'll pretend that this is the edge of the Mediterranean Sea, and this is Israel, and over here is Iraq, or from back in those days. So, and Eden was somewhere, out in this area too, and so God put Adam and Eve in a garden, from which two rivers flowed, the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. So they were out this way, and then when they had to leave, they went out east. They went further east. And then the story picks up with Abram and Sarai living in the east, and they start going west, with Terah. And they got as far as Syria and then stopped. And then God said, I'm going to show you land that I'm going to give you. And so they went west again and got to the land of Israel. But then they ended up having to go to Egypt. And then, and eventually they came back to the promised land. So, and then, later we hear about where does Joseph end up?
Egypt.
Down in Egypt. And then where do his, how do the people get out? They're there for 400 years in slavery. And then what happened after that? Moses brought them out of the promised land, and they went east again. Got as far as the promised land, and then turned around and wanted to go back where? Back to Egypt. Wandered around the desert for quite a while. Finally entered the promised land after Moses and that whole generation had died. And then down the road, after all of the kings, they divided into two nations, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And then the Assyrians swept in and conquered Israel. And then later the Babylonians swept in and conquered Judah, where Jerusalem is. And where did they take them? Back east again, into exile. But God didn't leave them there. He rescued them. He brought them back home. So it's this constant movement back and forth. And where did Jesus and his parents have to flee from Herod? Egypt. Back to Egypt. Until God brought them back home after Herod had died. So, so Abram and his family have gone to Egypt because there was a famine. Interesting. That's how later all of Joseph's family end up in Egypt, because there was another famine. But while they're there, what lie did Abram tell in Egypt? Yeah. Here she is, they're in their he's in his late 70s, she's in her late 60s, and he's trying to pass her off as his sister. Why? Yeah, apparently she was really good looking.
In the old King James, it says that she was very fair.
Mm-hmm, yes. The Egyptians saw, this is verse 14, that the woman was very beautiful. And so he was afraid that, the Egyptians are going to kill me because they want you. But I'll just say that you're my sister, and then, they'll take care. And so she was actually ended up being taken into Pharaoh's house to be like one of his concubines. But then the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai. Isn't that interesting? The Egyptian Pharaoh being afflicted with plagues. And then Pharaoh realized what was going on and said, "Why did you tell me that she was your wife? Take your wife, go." And so they
Wonder
let.
how he found out.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It must have been revealed to him somehow.
That is strange that all of this back and forth was all in the Middle East.
Yes.
None of them came like where we are today. Or,
Oh no,
you know, all-
no. This is
all in that area.
the Bible is very much a story centered in the Middle East, and so we have to read the whole thing and understand it from the perspective of people who live there, and that particular culture.
Abraham acquired more animals and sheep. And
Yes,
while
yes. So
he was
God
there,
blessed
you know, and
him while
one of
he
the
was
guys
in
that she was
Egypt.
the sister.
Yep. So, and then in chapter 20, if you want to just flip over there real quick, they do a lot of traveling around and so forth. And in chapter 20, Abram makes the same mistake again. They go on and sojourn in Gerar, and Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, so they've had their names changed at this point to Abraham, which means father of many, and Sarai, which it was my princess, which was changed to Sarah, which simply means princess. Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." And Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said, "Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman you have taken, for she is a man's wife." Now, Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, "Lord, are you going to kill innocent people?" He said, "She's my sister." "Yes, I know you've done this in the integrity of your heart. I kept you from sinning against you. Now, therefore, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, so he will pray for you and you shall live." So Abimelech, sent them out as well and gave them lots of sheep and oxen and get out of here.
It's a consolation prize.
So go back a little bit before that.
Kind of makes it sound like he was rewarded for that.
Yeah. So let's go all the way back now to chapter 13 in this part of the story. Now, one of the things that I want to point out, this poster, we've got extra copies over there if you haven't picked one up yet, is from the Bible Project, and it walks through the whole book of Genesis on one page. And one of the fascinating things that they show about the story of Genesis is that passage that we just read from chapter 12 is kind of like the hinge of the whole book. There's all the stuff that happens before that, and then there's this hinge story in chapter 12 that goes on to show everything else that happens after that. The two are kind of linked. The two halves of the book are linked in that way. And it's all about God's plan to rescue and bless his rebellious world through Abraham's family. All the way up until this point, there's been the stories of the new beginning, the beginning that God made with creating the world and everything, and then how we as humans messed everything up through our choices to rebel against God, to try and take power and knowledge and build ourselves up. So we've seen all these different stories of how violence spiraled out of control with Cain and Abel, and with all of the evil that had spread, and the flood, and the people of Babel or Babylon is how we also know who tried to exalt themselves. And God is making this new beginning with Abram and Sarai. So he's going to, through you, all families of the earth will be blessed. It's God's intention to bless us and to use us to be a blessing. And so the whole rest of the book of Genesis is the working out of God's promise of giving them a land of their own, making them into a great nation, and using them to bless the world. This is God's new way of dealing with his people and his world, using one family to bless the whole world. So in chapter 13, Abram goes up from Egypt, and they go up into the Negev, and Abram is very rich in livestock and silver and gold, and he's got his nephew Lot with him, and he's also doing very well. Lots of flocks and herds and tents, and they realize we can't, just stay together. There's not enough grazing ground, if we're in the same place. And so in verse 8 of chapter 13, Abram says to Lot, "Let there be no strife between your herdsmen and my herdsmen. We're kinsmen. Isn't that the whole land before us? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, I'll go to the right. If you take the right, I'll go to the left." So here, he's just letting it be up to Lot where they're going to be. It's like he's almost giving away the promised land. But Lot, looks up and sees the Jordan Valley looking really, well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like Eden, and like the land of Egypt, which was this fertile place. And so Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Every time they go east, it's like bad things start to happen.
They have to cross the Euphrates then all the time?
The Euphrates is a little further over to the east. Yeah.
Euphrates is up in Syria.
Yeah, and it flows all the way through Iraq as well.
Over to the, Gulf of Hormuz.
Yep. So why was Lot's choice to go east a bad idea? Where did he end up? Sodom. Gomorrah. So it's almost like, phew, he chose to go the wrong place, and Abram's going to be okay. He's going to have the promised land. And God again appeared to Abram after Lot had separated from him. This is verse 14. "Lift up your eyes, look from the place where you are. Look north and south and east and west. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So, what happens to Lot in Sodom? What's Sodom famous for, or infamous for?
Immorality.
What's that?
Immorality and.
Yes, immorality. There's this terrible stuff that happens, and they fled. So the first thing that happens is that Lot needs rescuing. There are all these kings that made war against the kings of Shinar and Elasar and Elam and Goyim all fought against Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and all these. And the king of Sodom, there were four kings fighting against 5, and they captured Lot and all of his possessions and took him away. And what does Abram do about it? Yeah, goes after him, rescues him. He's got pretty good group of warriors with him. And so he's able to defeat the guys that captured Lot and, bring them back home. He had 318 men. And so then we get this really interesting little sidebar here in verses 17 through 21, or 17 through 20. Will somebody read those verses there in chapter 14?
After Abram returned from his victory over
Yep.
and all his allies, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Seba, that is the king's valley. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, and the priest of the God Most High, brought Abram some bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abraham with this blessing. Blessed be Abram, blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God High, who has defeated your enemies for you. Then Abram gave Melchizedek 10th of all the goods he had recovered.
So there's this really interesting story of this priest, Melchizedek, who's also a king. And he worships the Lord. And he gives this blessing to Abram. And what does Abram do in return? Gives him a tithe. Gives him 10% of everything that he has and everything that he's, captured, with regaining Lot and all of his possessions. And in the New Testament, we hear about in the book of Hebrews, the writer talks about Jesus being a priest in the line of Melchizedek, who was priest and king at the same time. Interesting little sidebar there. So then we get to chapter 15, and God reaffirms his covenant promises to Abram and Sarai. He said, "Fear not, Abram, I am your shield, your reward shall be very great." But Abram has a little objection. He's like, how am I going to receive your promises? What's the ongoing problem that he and Sarai have? Still no kids. You made this promise to me, but we're still childless. And God said, no, your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, at night, and said, look toward heaven. Count the stars, if you're able to count them. Now imagine how many stars you'd be able to see in those days with no electric lights, no cities, that were bright enough to cloud anything. How many stars can you see in a truly cloudless night away from all the lights? That's how many your descendants will be. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted it to him as righteousness. And then, Abram says, but how do I know that you're going to make good on these promises? How am I to know that I'm going to possess the land that you've promised? And God has him do this kind of strange ceremony. Remember us talking about that in worship, what was it, a week or two ago? What is, so this is verses 9 through 10 and on. What does God have Abram do?
Make a
heifer,
sacrifice.
sheep and a ram.
Yeah. Yeah.
Divided it.
Kind of a sacrifice. He takes this ram and a goat and a heifer and a couple of birds. And what does God tell him to do? Cut them in two and put the pieces on the ground little ways apart. So this was a common practice back then. When you were going to establish a treaty, a covenant between you and someone else, you would take animals, cut them in half, move them apart a little bit, and walk through the pieces. Yeah. It's essentially saying what? May what happened to these animals happen to me if I don't keep my promise. So Abraham does this, cuts these and lays them out there, keeps the birds away, and then he lays down and sleeps. And verse 17, the sun had gone down, it was dark. A smoking fire pot and a flaming torch passed between those pieces. What was God saying? Because back then, fire was a symbol for God. God was saying, may I become like these animals. May the same thing happen to me if I don't keep my promise. So then God gave Abram, this is, now the, then, in chapter 16, they still haven't, years have gone by and they still haven't gotten the son that they're looking for. And so how do they try to help God fulfill his promises?
Sarah gives her wife girl to Abraham.
Yeah. It's like, it's just not working out between you and me, so why don't you take my slave girl? And, we can say that her child will be your heir. And so they have Ishmael. And
Abraham didn't rebel at that either.
yeah, he didn't seem to it didn't raise any complaints about that.
It was common practice. Jacob did the same thing.
Yep. But then Hagar was getting all haughty toward Sarah. Haha, I have a child, you don't. And so Sarah had Abram, send him off into the wilderness to die. But instead, Sarah had dealt harshly with her, and so she fled out into the wilderness. But an angel of the Lord found her and said, "Don't run away. Go back. Submit to her. Be kind to her, and I will surely multiply your offspring, so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." So she has this son, names him Ishmael, and so at that point, Abram's 86 years old. Another 13 years goes by. Abram is now 99 years old. And the Lord appeared to Abram again and said in chapter 17, I am God Almighty. Walk before me. Be blameless. I will make my covenant between me and you. I will multiply you greatly. And I will give to you and your offspring after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of kingdoms for an everlasting possession. And gives him the covenant of circumcision. This is going to be a sign of this promise. Every male among you shall be circumcised. And then God changes their names. It changes Abram, which means exalted ancestor, to Abraham, which means father of many. And changes Sarai, my princess, to Sarah, simply princess of many.
You think Abraham knew what that meant?
That his name was changed? Yeah. That's the actual literal meaning of those names in Hebrew.
God must have told him that in his heart like that, is what it meant, because
Mhm.
I'm sure he didn't have a dictionary.
No, but they would have known, the difference between those words in Hebrew. So then what? And so what? And he, again promises you are going to have a son. You and Sarah are going to have a son together. And how does Abraham respond to that?
Laugh.
Laughs. And when Sarah hears about it later on, overhears that promise, she laughs. He's 99, I'm 89. You got to be kidding me. And so God says, yeah, you're going to have a son. And what does he tell them that they're going to name their son? Isaac, which means,
She laughed.
yeah, he laughs. He laughs because God got the last laugh. Sure enough, they had a son. We're going to quickly kind of summarize a few more chapters here. So there's the whole story of Lot having to be rescued again from Sodom when horrible things were going on there. And God rescued Lot, got them to leave before he poured down fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah. And then in chapter 20, we just already heard that story about Abram again saying, oh yeah, she's my sister. Oh gosh. Yep, doesn't it? But then chapter 21 is where Isaac is born. And then, again, there's bad blood between Sarah and Hagar. And she actually has Abram send them away to die in the wilderness, but God provides for them in the wilderness and says, out of Ishmael, I will make 12 nations. What nations came from Israel, or from Ishmael?
The Arabs.
All the Arab nations. So we're still seeing all the conflict between the Arabs and the Israelis. This is nothing new. It goes all the way back to Isaac and Ishmael. Then in chapter 22, how did God test Isaac, or test Abraham? Said, I want you to sacrifice your son. It's like God was testing, and it specifically says that this is a test. It is testing Abraham, testing him to see whether he was putting his faith in his son, in his descendants, or putting his trust in God's promise, in the covenant that God had made with him. So you know the story of they go up this mountain. Dad, where's the sacrifice? Oh, where's the lamb for the sacrifice? Oh, God will provide the lamb. He thought that it was Isaac that was going to be the lamb, but instead, at the last moment, what happened? God stopped. Yeah, and
How old was Isaac when this happened?
teenager probably. Probably around a teenager. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that neither Abraham nor Isaac protest this. We don't get any sort of, oh, you can't, what?
Dad, what are you doing?
Right. You'd think, but it was really common in those days. All the other nations around them. This is what you did. When the gods were angry, or you were trying to appease the gods, or bargain with the gods, or get on the gods' good sides, you made a sacrifice. You gave up something of importance, an animal. And if that wasn't enough, the gods didn't respond the way that you wanted them, then you gave more, and you gave more. And what would be more precious to you than giving your own child? And that is what they often were expected to do. And so Abraham went along with it because that's what you do to please the gods. But God interrupted this and said, no, I'm not that kind of God.
Well, didn't Abraham have that much faith because he told his servants that the boy and I will return?
Isn't that interesting? Yeah, he specifically said, you know,
So even if
we're
he thought he
gonna
would
go
kill
up
him,
and
he would
worship,
raise
and then
him,
we'll both come back to you. Or was he just saying that so that they wouldn't, you know, suspect anything?
Yeah.
We don't know. We don't know. But God stopped him from sacrificing Isaac and provided a ram in the thicket. And so the ram died instead of Isaac. So how's that a picture for us in the New Testament?
God sacrificed his only son.
Yes. What God asked Abraham to do, God himself has done. He offered his only son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins and the sins of the whole world, to put an end to sacrifice, to take into himself the punishment. And
It came to my mind that nobody came to God and said, God, you don't have to sacrifice your son. Here's somebody else, you know, like he did for Abraham. There's no one to come along and do the same.
Right, yeah. God gave his, you know, we hear that in worship today, from probably the most famous verse in the Bible that you see people holding up at football games. Which one?
3:16.
John 3:16. Say it with me. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life.
What happens to all of those? All of those,
Mm.
Sodom and Gomorrah,
Mm-hmm.
you know, didn't know Christ.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
will they be condemned and be given a chance
So-
to?
We aren't given a real clear window into that, but we do see, you know, like in the book of Hebrews, it talks about all these people who lived by faith. Hebrews chapter 11 is this long history lesson of Abraham and Sarah and the prophets and the kings and the priests and all throughout Israel's history. And you know, and before them, Noah, you know, by faith, you know, he and all the animals in the ark were saved.
He was the only one, so what about the rest of them?
Yeah. So everyone who trusts the one true God will be saved. That, and so Hebrews 11 talks about all these people who've gone before us in faith. We're looking ahead to the promise that was yet to come. And that promise is realized in Jesus. So, a couple other things that we're going to look at next week. Sarah dies, and you know, Abram buys a field in Hebron, in the land of Canaan. That's the only thing the only part of the promised land that he actually owned was this one little field with a cave in it that he bought, and that site is still a holy site to the Jewish people to this day. And then we get the story of Isaac and Rebekah and how God finds how one of Abraham's servants finds a wife for Isaac. And then Chapter 25 talks about Abraham dying and his descendants. And so next week we are going to pick up on the birth of twin sons. What were their names? Yeah,
So,
yeah. We usually think of Jacob and Esau, but it was actually Esau
Esau and Jacob.
and then Jacob. Yep. So often God chooses the second rather than the first. So, yeah, next week we're going to be talking about trouble between brothers, because even while they were in Rebekah's womb, Esau and Jacob were fighting. And that was the story of their lives. So let's close in prayer. Lord, thank you for the story of your chosen people, the story of Abraham, Sarah, and their kid, and all their descendants, and how that story shapes the story of our lives and points us toward Jesus. Help us to continue growing closer to you as we study your word and see ourselves in these stories. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week.
This soccer player walked out